London, summer of 1305. The cobblestones were slick with morning dew, the air heavy with smoke, sweat, and something harder to name: fear. Crowds swelled in the streets, thousands deep, pressing against wooden barriers. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders, vendors shouted, selling meat pies and mugs of ale, laughter mingling with unease. But this wasn't a festival. They hadn't come to watch a joust or a parade. They had come to see a man die, a man who once made kings tremble. His name was William Wallace. To the English, he was a monster, a traitor who defied their king. To the Scots, he was freedom given flesh. And what was about to unfold wasn't justice, it was domination. Not just the killing of a man, but the erasure of the very idea he carried. But to understand why London gathered that August day, you need to know how Wallace had reached this moment. His death was only the final act of a brutal story written in betrayal, blood, and defiance. In the late 13th century, Scotland was a land of chaos wrapped in iron. Its kings kept dying without heirs, leaving the throne open to rival claimants. Nobles switched sides as easily as changing cloaks, swearing loyalty in the morning and betraying it by nightfall. Watching all this from across the border was King Edward I of England, Longshanks. He was ruthless, ambitious, and patient. To him, Scotland's instability wasn't a tragedy, it was an opportunity. When Scotland faltered, Edward struck, installing his allies, seizing castles, and forcing nobles to kneel. Many complied, thinking submission safer than defiance, but not everyone bent the knee. Wallace wasn't born into royal courts or palaces. He was the son of a minor knight, raised with little wealth and no grand titles, but hardship shaped him, and when the English killed his family, it lit a fire inside him. Some say it broke him. Others say it awakened something Scotland desperately needed. In 1297, that fire erupted into open rebellion. At the Battle of Stirling Bridge, Wallace showed the world that fury could become strategy. With cunning and courage, he lured the English across a narrow bridge, then cut them down in waves. The result was catastrophic for England. Thousands slaughtered, their pride shattered. For the first time, Edward's armies looked weak, and Scotland looked free. Wallace rose from obscurity to national hero, declared Guardian of Scotland. But glory never lasts. Freedom carries a price, and Wallace would pay it in blood. Edward regrouped, unleashing his armies with a ferocity Scotland had rarely seen. At Falkirk in 1298, Wallace's outnumbered forces were crushed. His allies abandoned him. Nobles bent the knee one by one, but Wallace refused. He became a shadow, slipping between forests, striking like a phantom. To the English, he was a terrorist. To the Scots, a ghost of hope. Whispers carried his name through taverns and churches, but whispers can be dangerous. The end didn't arrive in a clash of swords, it crept in quietly like rot spreading unseen. Near Glasgow, Wallace was sheltered by men he thought were allies. Among them was Sir John Menteith, a Scottish noble who had bent his knee to Edward. His motives are debated: fear, ambition, maybe silver weighed in his hand, but his act was certain. He betrayed Wallace. One night, English soldiers surrounded Wallace. There was no dramatic last stand, no battlefield glory, just torches in the dark, chains clanking, and the silence of men who had once called him brother. Wallace was dragged away, bound and broken, not by an enemy, but by his own countrymen. When Edward heard the news, he didn't hide his triumph. Wallace wasn't to be executed swiftly. No, he would be paraded, displayed, humiliated. The king wanted a performance carved into history. Wallace's march south was not transport, it was torment. For weeks he was dragged through English towns like a prize beast. Shackled, filthy, spat on by jeering crowds. Children hurled stones, merchants cursed his name, soldiers paraded him in chains. But he never bowed his head. Chroniclers say he stared back at every face, eyes blazing, as if memorizing each one. To the English he was a criminal, but to anyone who looked closely, the cruelty revealed who the true monsters were. By the time he reached London in August 1305, the city was alive with rumour. The Scots rebel was here, the king's greatest enemy, finally in chains. On August 23rd, Wallace was dragged into Westminster Hall. His trial was no trial at all, it was theatre. The charges: treason, sacrilege, murder. But there was a bitter irony. Wallace had never sworn allegiance to Edward. He couldn't betray a king he had never acknowledged. When asked to answer, Wallace stood defiant. "I cannot be a traitor to a king I never acknowledged," he declared. The hall erupted in outrage, but Edward already had his script written. The sentence was not just death, it was erasure. The punishment was a ritual of horror. Wallace would be dragged through the streets, hanged but cut down alive, disemboweled while breathing, his body quartered, his head tarred and mounted above London Bridge. This wasn't law, this was theatre, cruelty as spectacle. On the morning of August 23rd, London awoke not to fog but to fear. Crowds packed the streets, vendors sold ale, children clutched their mothers' skirts, old men leaned on sticks, all waiting for the performance. Wallace was tied to a hurdle, a wooden frame, and dragged from the tower across the city. Cobblestones tore at his flesh, mud caked his body. He was pulled like an animal through the jeering crowd. Some laughed, some spat, some simply stared, unable to look away. At Smithfield the scaffold loomed like a dark altar. Wallace was hoisted up, hanged by the neck, but not enough to kill, just enough to choke. His body convulsed, the rope was cut, he fell gasping. Then came silence. The executioner stepped forward, knife in hand. Slowly, deliberately, he cut open Wallace's abdomen. His organs pulled out one by one and cast into the fire before his eyes. His face grew pale, his mouth bloodied, but his eyes remained open. Finally, with one stroke of the axe it ended. His head rolled, blood pooling at the scaffold's edge. The crowd erupted in cheers, but the cruelty wasn't finished. Wallace's arms and legs were hacked apart, his body turned into 4 warnings. His head dipped in tar and set on a spike above London Bridge, glaring across the Thames. His limbs were scattered across Scotland. Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, Perth, not random, chosen. Each city a reminder, defy Edward, and this is your fate. Edward believed he had silenced rebellion. Instead, he lit its fire. Wallace's death didn't end the cause, it sanctified it. His broken body became a map of resistance. In Scotland, whispers turned to defiance once more. Within years, Robert the Bruce rose to strike back, carrying the torch Wallace had ignited. Wallace had no crown, no grand army, no palace walls to shield him. All he had was the refusal to bow, and that refusal carved itself into Scotland's bones. Soldiers on battlefields whispered his name before charging. Mothers told their children of the man who died in pieces but never surrendered. They killed the man, but they couldn't kill the idea. Even centuries later, his ghost lingers, statues on hillsides, ballads sung in taverns, freedom songs echoing in stone. Edward had tried to destroy him, but in doing so, he created something far more dangerous. In the heart of London, long after the cheers faded, Wallace's tarred head stared down from the bridge. A face meant to terrify, but it became something else, a symbol, not of fear, but of defiance. William Wallace didn't simply die. He was reborn in every generation that chooses resistance over submission, and that is why his execution was far more horrifying and far more powerful than you ever imagined. If this story sent chills down your spine, hit like and subscribe. More brutal truths from history's darkest corners are coming. Until next time, stay curious, stay haunted,